Let's go.
All right. Thank you for coming to an early didactic. I hope you all got at least a little bit of sleep last night after whatever fun you had. We're, as you see, going to be talking today about medical students as embedded simulation participants in point-of-care ultrasound training. This is a topic that's near and dear to many of our hearts. I'm Will Kropf. I'm from the University of Michigan, where I'm ultrasound faculty, and I lead our medical student ultrasound education.
My name's David Hadar. I'm also at the University of Michigan. I'm the Ultrasound Fellowship Director. We are going to be displaying our conflicts of interest and then moving on.
All right, so imagine that you're running an event where you are educating your interns on point-of-care ultrasound through a variety of stations, and you're using senior residents as your primary educators at each of the stations, and you have medical students who are being used as the models. And during this event, let's say you have a particularly overzealous resident who, in between rotators, decides that he wants to start practicing DVT ultrasound on the medical student.
Now imagine you're the med student and you are so uncomfortable with this, but you're applying into emergency medicine, you want to match at this program, and you feel uncomfortable speaking up. You're worried that saying something will torpedo your chances of matching here. You want to say something to somebody, but you don't know who.
And now imagine that you're the ultrasound director, and a week after that event, you receive an email from the Dean of Student Services telling you that the medical students felt very uncomfortable in this situation and that they felt coerced, and now you find yourself explaining this to the dean.
Not fun for anybody involved. But you know, even when everyone's when everyone's intentions are best, you know, you're trying to take advantage of these learning opportunities. No one's really malicious here, but if you're not being proactive and anticipating these problems and having safeguards in place, you can run into a lot of trouble.
So today we put together this panel to try to help prevent some of these problems. And we're going to be talking about all the issues that can arise when you're working with medical students in this situation. We hope that we'll be able to talk through some of the ethical and logistical and educational issues that arise in these circumstances. And I hope that from the experiences that we've had and the situations that we've encountered, and then all the best practices that we've built out of those situations, you're able to take away some nuggets that you can then take back to your own institutions.
A phrase you're going to hear us use a lot is ESP, or embedded simulation participant. We use this instead of the word model because model can be dehumanizing. We borrow the word ESP from the simulation literature. It basically means a participant in the simulation who's helping guide it and who's contributing to it. Our med students are heavily involved in our simulation sessions. They provide educational points. They are active participants, and we want to make sure our language reflects that.
So please forgive us if we slip up and use the term model, but we'll try to gravitate more towards this term today. And then let's move into our learning objectives for the didactic. So first of all, we want to work with the panel to articulate the challenges that exist in creating a safe and respectful space for our medical students as they participate along with us. And hopefully we can really dig into a couple of these topics. And then second, I want to help all of you consider how you can implement some of the best practices that we use surrounding the elements of informed consent, proper education of all of the participants about their roles, and then potentially using a neutral third party as an ombudsperson to help keep everyone safe and comfortable.
And we have an amazing panel of panelists here for you. We're going to have them take the time to introduce themselves. Please, panelists, let us know your names, where you're from, and what your role is in ultrasound education.
My name is Craig Bolger, and I am the Fellowship Director at Ohio State and Associate Division Director and Coordinator of our TSUP pool, which is our ESPs.
Hi, I'm Rachel Liu. I'm at Yale School of Medicine, where I'm the Emergency Ultrasound Fellowship Director, but also the Director of Point-of-Care Ultrasound Education for the school.
Hi, I'm Sam. I am a fourth-year outgoing chief at the University of Michigan, and I'm a certified clinical ethicist, and I'm in the ultrasound track at our program, which is one of our specialized ultrasound tracks.
I'm Michelle Feeney. I was an ESP as a med student at Ohio State, and I'm now an also outgoing fourth-year resident at University of Michigan and involved in the ultrasound track.
All right, thank you, panelists. So today our format is going to be, oh, sorry, I forgot to flash this in case somebody needed to write down names. Give you that moment to look at that. So this format is going to be primarily a moderated discussion between us and the panel. We'll start with some pre-prepared questions just to get the conversation rolling and begin introducing these topics. But we hope that throughout the course of this, we can elicit some comments from you and some questions that you may be interested in. As we go along, if you want to give us a comment or offer anything, then please just signal to me or David, and we can come by with the microphones that will capture everything well. But with that, let's go ahead and get started with our panel. So first question for all of you. At your institution, who do you use as live volunteers for ultrasound training, and to what extent are med students involved as models?
I'll start with this one. So med students are our primary ultrasound models at OSU. We have a very strict curriculum now for them after an incident very similar to what you described happened about 10 years ago. And so we really changed our practice from a more casual approach to a very structured approach. They get a lot of training in their rights and kind of what the scans are going to look like.
I think similar for us, it depends on the target group. So for med student activities, then it's largely peer, like ESP modeling for the med student group. If it's residents and there happen to be some med students kind of people on rotation, then they might get asked to see if they're willing to be ESPs. And lately I've been getting asked by other services like anesthesia, et cetera, to help them find medical students to be ESPs for them, which I have declined and said that they need to find their own residents or their own people, because I don't want to open up the whole med school population for, you know, all these random things that might happen. So that's still a work in progress.
And at Michigan, we use medical student volunteers as ESPs for a lot of our emergency medicine didactics, like intern ultrasound boot camp, our Sona Wars. For me, it's a recruitment and a volunteer opt-in.
So in what way are medical students incorporated into the process for you? What sort of role do they take on when they work with you?
So for us, our students, we actually published a paper a long time ago now, looking at students as learners. And so they model and are different than Rachel. They are a pool that's booked through our CSAC, our clinical skills lab. Now they say what they will and won't. Everything has to come with what scan is going to be done, so that they can decide ahead of time if they do or don't want to participate. So they're never directly reached out to. It's kind of a global email to the whole pool. And then many of them, depending on their level of training, also can serve as proctors as well. So depending on, I've even had them proctoring for attendings. So it's really cute when you see the M2 teaching the vascular surgeon how to find the aorta. And it gives them a lot of confidence, and I think has helped them for networking. But very similarly, like it's all opt-in for us, and they primarily serve as models, but we do have a proctor pool as well.
I would say, like, I think they send an email out to the entire medical school at Michigan to recruit people who want to volunteer as ESPs. So we get a range of people. So like M1s through M4s, people who are interested in emergency medicine, people who aren't applying in emergency medicine. And so it can really just like kind of run the gamut in terms of who we get. But it has been interesting that there are some people who like recurrently volunteer, and I've had private conversations with some of them where they're like, yeah, I've learned a lot about bedside cardiac ultrasound and like know a lot about these things simply by participating in these events.
I think like ESPs are also needed for a lot of non-ultrasound things too. So for example, like physical examination practice. And so we sometimes say, hey, if you will want to be an ESP for, I don't know, the knee exam, then the trade-off is afterwards, we will actually teach you some knee ultrasound or whatnot. And so there's kind of like a symbiotic partnership.
So you're both sort of alluding to these benefits that the medical students take away from it. What would you think the benefits are for being involved? I mean, obviously learning ultrasound is part of that, but are there other benefits that they receive as well?
I think a lot of them get access, so you have direct one-on-one access potentially with like the chair of a department or another resident, and you can be like, oh, tell me about residency, like how did you get in, what did you do? And I see a lot of like mentorship happening when they're being scanned. It also gives them protected time to study. Many of ours have like mastered like holding their Anki cards above their head while they lay there and get scanned. For us, modeling is one option for curricular components too. So we have a longitudinal ultrasound curriculum where they don't have to model to get credit, but they can use those modeling hours towards credit in the program.
Sorry, you referenced Anki cards. I don't know what that is.
Oh, they're flashcards online. Our students are obsessed with them.
Oh, okay.
They can do them while they're getting scanned.
And Dr. Feeney,
Behind
you,
the times, Will, behind the times.
as a med student who was involved in this, can you speak to how this was like incorporated into your schedule and kind of speak to the perceived or actual benefits of being a med student in this program?
Yes, I did it mainly as an M1 and M2. So I really liked it because that was a very heavy lecture component. There wasn't a lot of hands-on, and I was really craving more hands-on opportunities. So as I was also at Ohio State, they would send out a big kind of Google Doc that gave all my opportunities for the semester. I often tried to find things that matched up with what we were learning. So I was in aorta ESP during my GI block. I did a lot of cardiac in my cardiac block, and really enjoyed seeing the anatomy. I felt like people genuinely went out of their way to teach me and not just say, she's an ESP. They're like, oh, it's our med student in her GI block, and we found her celiac trunk. And they always made sure I could see the screen, was a part of kind of the conversation and the activity, and I really appreciated that. And it was really easy to fit it into my schedules. A lot of times these were activities for med students, so they were in the evening, or they were daytime rheumatology conferences, or daytime I did, all sorts of different opportunities with ESPs. So it was daytime, evenings, very flexible.
In terms of other benefits, I don't know if you all do this at your institutions, but we actually financially compensate our volunteers too, which can be like a controversial practice in some ways, but they do get paid to be there.
I wish we had that. So, our problem is there's some groups of so the problem is when we say SPs, it can also mean standardized patient. And so those standardized patients can actually be hired by the school to do it. And then now we're asking our medical students to be like, hey, can you do this for free? We don't have any budget to pay you. And those SPs can actually get paid a lot. And so this is where we find ourselves in discussions, a lot of times at higher levels of school. But we just don't have, the money for anyone who wants to be an ultrasound SP.
So just to follow up on that, you mentioned that there is some complication surrounding payment of medical students in this role. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit more about why that's complicated?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that on the face value, when you look at it, it could be potentially coercive, right? You're paying students to let them use their body, which sounds horrible. I will say that talking privately with some of the medical students, I remember being a med student and being I'm in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. I can't get a job because I am studying constantly, I'm in class constantly, and I'm totally reliant on the loans that I'm taking out. And some people have told me, they're this is how I get disposable income, is there would otherwise be no opportunity for me to marry both learning, exposure, networking, and also a little bit of financial compensation. So I have actually viewed the practice very positively, but I may be biased because I went to Michigan for medical school too.
And have you had any difficulty in any of your respective institutions obtaining funds for medical students if you are a part of a group that does pay them for this?
I don't know where the money comes from. I literally don't.
We have a budget in our ultrasound division budget. It's not a lot. It's not nowhere near what the SPs get paid, and in knowing what anesthesia pays their SPs, it's not really comparable to other departments, but it's something. And I feel like Will and I are hogging the mic, so please, if anyone has any questions, raise your hand, flag me down. Yes.
Romulo, we're being recorded. Give us just a sec for the mic to come, please.
Got to get my steps in.
When you have medical students who participate in these programs at any level, do you mentor them on how to put it in their CV? And do you have any creative titles that allow them to get credit for some of the work they're doing without just being a standardized model who lays there?
So we call ours TSUPs, which is trained standardized ultrasound patients. And every ARIS application I've seen, it's in there, and they're great at putting their long descriptive of how they got advanced anatomy exposure and ultrasound training. They have learned how to over the years, and we kind of provide a sample of that on our site, how would you describe this? So we have an entire website for them, and they are trained, right? They go through, this is what the scan is that you're getting ready to sign up for. These are your rights. They have about 5 or 6 mandatory videos they have to watch before doing it. And so I think it does give it a little more credence than I just went and laid on a bed. And so they can explain kind of what that is. They then can graduate into being coordinators for the program, and then subsequently proctor pool coordinators and then proctors. So they kind of have a tiered approach that can get them 3 to 4 checkboxes on their ARIS application that I think helps them. Most of them say they talk about this. I have never interviewed one of them, but if you've interviewed one of my medical students, they tell me they talk about this all the time in their application and in their interviews, and I think it really speaks volumes to taking that extra step to put in more time to get more exposure.
So several of our students who are doing this are actually part of our kind of ultrasound training pool in general. And part of our expectations for that program is that they also teach. So not only teach their peers, but teach in whole class workshops. So what actually goes on their CV is like a student as teacher sort of certification or certificate that gets attached to their graduation diploma.
And Michelle, do you want to talk about how it impacted you when you were applying?
It's similar since obviously it was Ohio State. It was the TSEP program, but I actually coupled it with, I took ultrasound courses as a med student. So I said I took the beginner's ultrasound course, intermediate, advanced, and each course was coupled with 15 hours of TSEP modeling. So I was able to say as part of this course, I did this many hands-on sessions, this many didactic sessions, and for 15 hours of each part of those courses, I served as a model, gaining more anatomy, and it was really wide variety of opportunities. Like I said, it was rheumatology, MSK, emergency medicine. So I listed it as part of like a formal coursework on mine, and a lot of people brought it up.
Great question. Thank you.
Some of you have mentioned before having some training for the students or some information for the students regarding which scans they would be comfortable with and what that would look like. Where do you bring that into either the consent process or sort of telling them what each scan would entail ahead of time?
Thank you.
Yeah, so our students have to. Our students have to watch these videos and sign off that they did them, and then we also have what we call a TSUP Bill of Rights that anybody who's scanning is required to review, and then it also hangs in our scanning room. That kind of states like, here's what's expected of the student, and here's what's expected of you as a scanner. And then we had, after our little incident that was very similar to eerily similar to the one you described, including all the way to the Title IX office, about 10 years ago, we then subsequently made sure we showed the students what each scan looks like. So before you sign up for a scan, you can see exactly where they're putting the probe, how are they draping you. We make a rule that no one but the student touches their clothes, no one but the student touches their towels. So that's part of our consent, is like the student knows all of these things prior to, and we don't let just anybody sign up. So our modeling pool is limited to those who have completed the training already.
It's really interesting, and like I appreciate how open you are about like what happened at your program. So it's like interesting to see Dr. Bolger's program like as like a future state, because for us our incident happened like relatively recently, which is what motivated this whole session. And like our hope is that for all of you, that you do not have to have a Title IX incident to implement some of these practices. Do not advise. So we're like a little bit earlier kind of in our process of implementing a lot of these things. And so what I would say is like, what I did was I looked at our existing consent form for the volunteers, which was horrifying. So it was like multiple paragraphs, not to say if anybody in this room participated in writing it, but it was like multiple paragraphs about the history of ultrasound and emergency medicine. And then like the very last line was some like legal jargon and was like, you good with doing this? Like sign below. And I was like, this is not great. And so we have modified the consent form, which I think is printed out here too.
We have copies to hand out.
And so now we describe like what the event's going to look like, what are the types of scans that you might participate in if you're willing to, and then we have an area where you mark, these are the scans I'm comfortable with, or these are the scans I'm not comfortable with. So like saying like a DVT scan is going to involve the groin, cardiac exam is going to involve the chest. And so they get given all these materials in the recruitment process and can see that in advance.
And Sam, because you're well-versed in ethics and you understand the elements of informed consent well, do you mind just talking a little bit about how like some of the elements of informed consent play into our current form?
Yeah, and I would say, like, you all know this, like, we are all emergency medicine physicians. I think the block sometimes is just like applying the things that we do in our everyday practice for our patients to these like vulnerable medical students that we work with too. And so informed consent is like, there needs to be an element of voluntariness, so they have to like be free of coercion and choose to do this thing. And you have to just tell them about the potential risks and benefits of what is involved. And so we try to incorporate those things in the consent form. So like, we've talked so much about the educational benefits here, there's the financial compensation too, but there are some risks as well, like incidental findings and like how you manage that is a huge potential risk for these people. And also like, you know, the mechanical, like theoretical risks of using certain ultrasound applications on patients who are pregnant, or students who are pregnant or volunteers who are pregnant. And so it's really including all of the risks, all of the benefits, allowing them the space to be able to ask questions, and then giving them the opportunity to be able to like decline and also like change their mind as throughout the volunteer process.
Awesome. We have a question over here.
So our school has always had a problem with the follow-up. If you find an incidental finding on a student, like who's going to follow up, what's going to be happen with that data, how is that data stored, how's that information stored, how do you handle that?
So I really like hearing what was just said, because we don't have a formal consent process yet, and I've never had to deal with Title IX, so I'm thinking I gotta build this stuff. But we do have an incidental finding policy, and so when someone signs up, they are given the incidental policy, or mainly it's actually more important for the faculty to understand what to do when they find something. And so basically our policy says, if you find something, obviously don't shout it out in the whole big group, right? Take the SP aside later on and say, hey, look, I think we found something. I'm gonna get a supervisor, like just say it's a resident who found something. I'm gonna get a supervisor to come rescan you. And if they both find something, then it'll escalate up usually to me, or one of the directors of physical exam, if it happens in that setting. And then what we'll do is we'll also have a look, and those are recorded, either recorded on the tablet or recorded in our QPath system, or I have directly seen it. And then we will be the ones to kind of try to facilitate the follow-ups. So recently we had someone who was just doing an M1 modeling thing, and we were like, something is kind of weird in your atrium. And we were able to get him appointment with cardiology for a comprehensive echo. But we've had other situations where a student, we found something and then they had to have surgery like the next day. So I just think for faculty who are participating, understand what that chain of command looks like, and going from there. I don't know if that answered your question adequately.
I would say like our incidental finding protocol is one that like we could modify a little bit too, but something that we do is that we always pre-scan our volunteers, which is like in a private setting. So like that way, if you encounter an incidental finding, it's not like in front of your peers, or it's not in front like in a public setting. So I think that's a very important piece. And then in terms of our current protocol, you have to, like, if you're not an ultrasound faculty, you have to confirm the finding with an ultrasound faculty, and then there's like different categories of like how concerned you are about the finding. And so like most severe is like we send this person to the emergency department, and then less severe is like follow up with your primary care doctor. I think the one issue though is that a lot of our ultrasound events or educational events happen in the SIM center, where we have ultrasound machines that are not connected to our QPath system. And so we actually have no means of saving these images. If this was something, I think we would all agree that potentially, maybe if there is something significant that this person required further follow-up on, having those images to like confirm it later on or to compare would be really helpful. But that is like kind of one gap that we could probably work on in the future.
And we put all of our skills lab machines just recently onto QPath for something very similar, so that we have a skills lab department essentially that all of the educational machines go to, so that if I need to like download and send it to a specialist, I can do that very easily.
QPath is not paying us, I promise.
No. Ours is accidental saving because the SIM center machines are inherited from old hospital equipment. So the Wi-Fi, the security things are still applied.
So if possible, could you talk us through what your processes look like for recruiting medical students? And obviously, informed consent is a big part of this, and like talking through the incidental findings policy. You've mentioned like some people do email blasts, but I'm curious what processes you have in place that result in what you feel like is a safe relationship with your ESPs.
So for my specific program, I kind of right around now send an email to all the incoming class recruiting for the program. And as part of that recruitment letter, there is like a statement that says the people in this program will be self-modeling. And so basically it's often like, don't join this program if you're like uncomfortable, doing things. For our whole class workshops, then the Office of Curriculum will email that class and ask for an opt-in process. And if no one really, if no one comes forward, then my group of people who will be teaching their peers have already opted in, so they can teach and kind of model at the same time. But I think that we could be clearer, in our processes. And what we do is, because we're in small groups, that relationship with the faculty member can be a more, I'd say, like, private one. So if something is kind of found, or there is something, it's A, isolatable to what happened, but B, also, it's not in a very large group of people at one time.
So ours are not recruited by faculty. Ours are recruited by their peers. So our ultrasound student interest group sends something out to everyone, and then you have to, like I said, go through the process. So they outline this is what it is. It's done by typically a third year who's running the TSUP pool. And then once the TSUP pool is established, all the communication between the skills lab and the students is via the student. So no, it shouldn't feel like coercion. There's no faculty being like, I know you didn't answer me. Sometimes we do get desperate. We're like, we will give you triple hours if you can just be here for an hour today. Because they do get credit for their hours. We do have, there's no requirement for modeling. That was very clearly laid out to us from the College of Medicine, that any course that has modeling as part of it has to have an alternative component. So they can either do additional scanning time, they can do additional proctoring time, they can do side research projects. Like, we have several alternatives so that no one feels like they have to model to complete a course.
It sounds like you're taking steps to reduce power distance very intentionally so that the students don't necessarily feel like they must do this thing.
Also, if anyone wants more consent forms, I have them.
Hi, I was wondering, how have you, consent's not the right word, how have you worked with the folks who are scanning on their sort of understanding of like trauma-sensitive education and avoiding the issues that often come up where, the ESP is in fact very aware of what is being scanned, but overzealous resident or faculty or whomever is like, actually, I'm going to do this. I'm not thinking about you as a person. Like, how have you like educated your people in that way?
So our proctor pool is educated, and about 10 times during the thing, your student is your patient. You treat them like your patient. You approach them like your patient. They have the same rights as your patient. So it probably gets really annoying, but everybody walks up and they're like, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm going to do a fast exam. Are you okay with that? On repeat. Every single solitary time. We have a script that's put up in the rooms. We have the Bill of Rights in every room that we're scanning in. It's a little bit harder as we creep out of my sphere of influence, right? So like EM, got it. They get tons of trauma-informed care, like mind your face. Tell them your face looks weird because you have no idea what you're looking at, not because something bad. Or if you get excited, we always remind them, like, tell the student that this is normal. You're just really excited about it. Because there's a lot of like, ooh, fun. And ooh, fun is really okay in medicine, right? Like when we get excited, it's usually something horrible. So reminding them to teach the student, tell the student what you're seeing, show the student the screen. As we've branched out into institutional ultrasound, it's a little bit harder, but the same proctors are there, so trying to reinforce that your student is a patient, your student is a volunteer, your student gets to leave whenever they want. Like, if you make them feel uncomfortable, you no longer have a model, and that's on you.
I have a question about kind of, you guys mentioned the different ways that students provide, assent or consent for those activities. To what extent was institutional legal involved in preparing those documents?
After Title IX applies.
I don't think we had legal involved in our process.
No, I think I went to like our Department of Standardized Patients, like through the medical school, to see what their consent form looked like, because theirs had been run through our Office of General Counsel, and just to see the language that they used, and then modeled ours after that, essentially.
I now take a very much a not ask for forgiveness approach. So like the deans have all seen the website and signed off on it. The director of the skills lab has seen the website and signed off on it. Legal has seen our consent forms and signed off on them. Like we went, and we're pretty strict, like we don't do any pregnant patients. We only do G-rated scanning, as we call it. So if you had to be in a bathing suit to do the scan, can't do the scan. Like we don't do any DVT scanning on students at all, because that just, the creep is too risky. So we try to make some very clear boundaries around it.
Really good questions from the group. Anyone else?
I did want to ask about, we do a lot of gamified education in ultrasound. We're sort of known for that. And sometimes we like to advertise what we're doing with photographs on social media. And I'm curious, whenever you do any kind of gamified event or you're trying to do advertisement, what kind of steps do you take surrounding photography or filming to protect your ESPs?
I will say for Sono Games and when we do the AIM Sono Slam, all the participants have to sign a waiver, which includes a media waiver. For the internal events, it may be not that prescriptive. I usually just ask, hey, are you guys okay with this going on Twitter or something? And usually they say yes. But as long as they are asked somehow, and then whenever we do like the photography or filmography, you try to make sure to capture it in a way that's not going to look suggestive or weird.
So having been on the receiving end of these concerning emails, I recognize how stressful it can be, but I guess have you had situations where you have overzealous, like, an intern or a second year comes in and is like, oh my God, gamified ultrasound, like this is such a cool station. I'm gonna take a video and post it on Instagram. So not even coming from the organizers, but from the participants. Like, how do you try to avoid that? Do you have a strict no phones policy? Because sometimes the med student participants can end up in the background. Like, how do you deal with these types of situations?
Well, we learned the hard way. I think we now put it into either the consent form or at least setting expectations. Like, hey, there might be times where we are taking pictures to advertise these events on our residency Instagram. But we have taken a pretty hard line now where we try to remind all the residents, you should not have any students in your photos. Take pictures of the participants, you can take pictures of the stations, but do not include the students, because it's just so easy to, all of a sudden, it's like somebody's being draped for an abdominal exam and their belly showing, or for a cardiac exam and their chest is showing. And so we just try to avoid it as much as possible.
I would say the bigger problem we've had is they get really excited about the game and they forget that this is a human. I try to be very selective with who participates in any gaming event, that it is a very seasoned person who they know what they're signing up for. One of my current faculty, when he was a med student, I just remember the residents ripping his socks and shoes off. It was Sono scavenger hunt, and he was pineapple, using his safe word. And he was fine, he was just joking, but they're just I was guys, remember, he's a person, leave Charles alone, put his shoes back on, and thankfully it was just his socks and shoes. So I think it's being very thoughtful about who that person is, and if anybody's uncomfortable, if it feels sketchy at all, I'm I'll be the model. I think that's the default, is like if you wouldn't put yourself in that situation or in that picture, which I probably am the wrong person because I have limited boundaries and modesty, but then don't put your student in that situation. And so like if I never let them scan for peng blocks, I never let them scan for DVTs unless it's on me, because I know that I have given my full consent and don't care.
You've brought up modesty and draping a couple of times in this, and I wanted to move the conversation a little bit into an equity discussion, because I've found that in the past, I've been a little reticent sometimes to assign a woman to be my cardiac model. And I'm wondering what it means for our participants if we might be somehow limiting exposures just based on our own biases. Do you guys have any experience with that?
I think it was helpful as a student where it was all opt-in. And what was already mentioned, I was given very clear instructions about what a cardiac scan entailed, what an aorta scan entailed. And I even remember suggestions of like best clothing to wear, whether it be scrubs, sports bra or whatever would make me kind of help facilitate a comfortable scan. And knowing if you're not comfortable, I could do median nerve, I could do knee, I could do cardiac. And I had all the opportunities for the semester, and it was 100% my choice. And if I wanted cardiac to see what my heart looked like, it was something I was able to choose and opt in.
I will say it's a balance. Like I remember when I was in medical school, anesthesia was recruiting for volunteers to be ESPs, and they're like, we only want male medical students. And it made me really angry. I was really upset because like it was a financially compensated role, and it was like, why is this opportunity only available to certain like student population, a certain demographic of the student population, just because like you're scared of me in a sports bra, but like I also have like different boundaries too. So I think the balance is recognizing this is a vulnerable population that is at risk of coercion depending on how you are asking them to participate. But I also think that we would be ultimately doing not only our like learners, but also our patients a disservice, because like you're gonna have to go out into the world and half of your patients are gonna be people with breasts or like sensitive like areas of the chest that you need to learn how to drape appropriately. So like learning in a safe educational environment how to do that and how to treat your patient and the student that you're working with respectfully, I think is an incredibly important skill that we would be missing out on if we didn't include them.
So my training groups in our small groups are deliberately half male, half female. And so what I found is that actually, the females want to do cardiac just as much as the males do. So like male doesn't have to be token guy for the cardiac exam, right? But in those discussions, then they start thinking about, patients who might have like pendulous breasts and how to get around that. And so I feel like that whole discussion is very useful for the whole group, even if, most of our SPs don't have, that body habitus. But it just opens up a lot more avenues for discussion.
And another topic that I wanted us to delve into a bit is this idea of who do the ESPs appeal to if there's a problem. Let's say something arises, they become uncomfortable in the situation. How do they manage that?
So we used to, back when Michelle was a model, have a neutral SP that was who we paid to just sit in the room. The funding unfortunately ran out for that. The Skills Lab decided we were safe now. But they would just sit in the room and introduce themselves to the students. They made sure the students were comfortable from a warmth standpoint, that they had clean, dry towels, and that if they needed anything, they could come to them. Now they go initially to their TSUP coordinator. We kind of have essentially a chain of command. If they don't feel comfortable going to a peer, they come to me. If they don't feel comfortable coming to me, they can go to the dean. And we have a very clear outlined chain of command as to how they can approach it. So they have at minimum 3 options at any given time of who they can address, depending on their comfort level and what the situation was.
And then now we're using not a neutral, but one of our faculty members in the emergency department as an offense person at some of our events. So similar to what I have remembered at OSU, except instead of it being just a neutral party not related to the faculty or the curriculum, we're using someone who's connected to our department just as a neutral party to circulate and be a point person for ESPs if they feel uncomfortable.
So some of you guys run programs that are coming out of emergency departments and some maybe out of the medical school where you may have outreach and accountability to other departments. Even if you're coming from the emergency department, you may have events that you guys do where you participate with other departments. When that accountability doesn't necessarily lie within your own department, what do you do if there is a little bit of an issue? If there's a resident who's overzealous, but maybe not someone who's in your direct chain of command, to be able to have them feel accountable to you for further discussion or consequences?
I fortunately don't think that has happened too much at my place, but I would say something. But that is because I am in sort of like a position of power, and like the other specialties know like what my position is in the school. So I feel like I could do that. But I feel like if you see something inappropriate going on, you know, take that resident privately and say like, hey, listen, I just want you to let you know from my personal experience, this doesn't go over well. FYI, you probably didn't know you were doing it. But yeah, those power dynamic issues are interesting. It goes back to kind of what Rob was saying earlier about consent processes and stuff, because I was laughing internally, because what if that person who is acting inappropriately is your boss, right? And I'm a faculty member, I'm a junior faculty member, and now this is, like, I know that this person who has been teaching for like 20 plus years, you know, this is their style and they're not gonna change, right? So that gets interesting too.
We centralized institutional point of care ultrasound education 5 years ago, and I'm in charge of that. So ultimately, like via the TSUP pool and via that, like it still ends with me, and residents know I have no problem talking to their PDs. So I think that's like the TSUPs go up their chain of command, and ultimately it ends up with me, or if they want to skip me, it goes to the dean. But that's, I think, how we keep it organized, is like they have somebody that's their point person for that scan that day. And the fact that all those students who are trained still fall under my purview, like anything that happens with them, they know that that's a direct line. And then the CSAC will just no longer let them schedule if it becomes a recurring issue. They are our skills lab is very strict about boundaries and rules. And if you violate them, they have no problem taking your right to schedule away.
I have a question about the U of M form. I noticed that you asked the ESP to check which body region they're comfortable with. So once they check off not everything, how do you keep track? Do you have a sticker system on the badge? How do you do that?
Oh, I love all these near plants that we have. So we've actually developed a form where we keep this displayed next to the ESP during the entire event. And our ombuds person is actually responsible for reviewing this with the ESP and reviewing their consent form when they arrive each day. So for us, it's something that we're trying to work into a new workflow so that we try to protect everybody. But like Craig brought up, the ombuds person role is a bit tricky because you have to find the right people for it, and these people commonly are going to be uncompensated. So they have to be internally motivated to be someone who is going to work with the medical students. So from our perspective, we've been using people who are either affiliated with the course that's happening already or somehow already affiliated with the medical school and know and have relationships with the med students. But commonly, these are like 2 to 4 hour events when we're doing these things. So it's not a small ask on a faculty member to be involved in this way. So for us, there's a lot of challenge logistically in just finding enough bodies to be present as ombuds people. But it's a thing that we think is potentially a useful practice for others to adopt. And one of the things that we wanted to hand out, we created a set of best practices for the ombuds person role as well. And we're still working to see where the holes are in this, but at least for the last year, we've had some amount of experience with it. David, I'll have you pass these out also if you're able to. We are running a bit short on time at this point. We have about 5 minutes left. I was hoping to have us break into small groups before we walk away so that we can discuss these ideas a little bit. In particular, I wanted to focus on, after having been encountering these ideas and then thinking through what kind of barriers might exist at your shop, get together with a few other people and talk about what of these ideas might you want to start implementing where you work, and consider like how would it go about becoming a reality, because probably there are some barriers that exist, whether it be financial or logistical. So I just wanted to flash up a few breakout discussion questions, and then please get into like some smaller groups and talk about this for a couple of minutes, and then we'll maybe have a report out with a couple of ideas at the end.
I will say in addition, if you don't want to make all these videos because they were a pain to make, our osuultrasound.com website has a TSUP section that has all these videos there. So if you don't want to go back through and make them, because they're really awkward. They're very uncomfortable to make because we did like inappropriate scenarios and everything like that to try to stage really what is and isn't okay. And they're really corny. Includes speak up TSUP is our motto for the students. So.
Well, I encourage you to get into some small groups. I encourage our panelists to come mingle with people, have a little bit of conversation around what this could look like where you work.
And Will, just one last question from the group, a really good one over here. Does anyone do med students scanning other med students? And like what kind of problems arise there? Panel,
Yeah, all of our students scan each other as well. So usually the M1s are modeling for M2s and 3s, but then the M3s typically, the M4s, depending on where we are in interview season, M3s and M4s will model for the M1, M2 courses.
Yeah, because I do an ultrasound elective and it's M2s,
Yeah.
scanning M2s.
Yeah.
And
So we usually have different classes. It's usually someone who's already been in that class is the model, except for the M1s. So the M1s have, the M1s have 2s, 3s, and 4s model for their session so that they all have equal opportunity to participate in the session. And then for the 2s coursework, it's either an M1, M3, or 4. So the students do model for each other, but we don't want it to be from within that class as much as possible. Just so A, it's a little less awkward, but they don't seem to care from that standpoint. But B, so they have adequate opportunity to actually do the scanning. So yeah, we haven't had any student-to-student issues.
okay, just want to make sure that
15,
wasn't
20
like
years,
that.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if you can, let's break up into small groups for a few minutes here and just talk these issues through a little bit.
if anyone wants a form and didn't get one from me, they're up here. Then like when I do the Sona Wars, like all the gamified stuff, we send another email to the students, like breaking it down station by station of like, these are the games. Yeah. Yeah, it's, so luckily we have like an awesome team of track residents. You know, we're like, so like we have like 15 residents who help put it together. Yeah. Yeah. That makes it a lot harder. Because we do intern boot camp and then Sona Wars, which Rob started and I kind of took over. Yeah. Faculty running it, that's a lot of work. Yeah. No, I totally hear that.
All right, everybody, we're going to run up against time here, so we're going to have to bring things back together. Thank you all for being so invested in the conversation. I can tell that you're still all talking about these things. Before we all walk away, I would like to thank our panelists. So panelists, we would like to give you all a big round of applause, please. Thank you so much for being with us today. And then we encourage all of you to continue having this conversation both among yourselves and with all of us. Here's our contact information. We would love to continue sharing documents with you or having more conversations about these topics.
And thank you for being such a great crowd.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.